togetherness and alliance, as we've been saying throughout the whole of this episode, these mammoth episodes. Correct, we're on the 7th hour. This is fantastic, which takes me now to somebody who has been, again, another inspiration to many people all over the world. As I've said in the previous editions and the previous episodes, and even earlier on through this mammoth live stream, is that the whole of Hit Talks is also created around the energies of the ancient Mayan calendar, the sacred calendar. And Calleman is just somebody who's written Vicky, English, please. Calleman is somebody that has written many books on the Mayan astrology, wanting to know a little bit more about it, but also a PhD in biology, I think, from Stockholm. I'm not even reading your bio here, Carl, it's just from memory because we speak so often. But he's just a sponge of knowledge, and he just educates. He's speaking in many, many countries over the world. I think it's like 25, written 7 books in 14 languages, all these amazing things to inspire people all over the world. And I always love listening to you, Carl, and so thank you for coming back to Hit Talks. God, I've been talking for 7 hours. Coming back to Hit Talks, and I now give you your 8 minutes.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, you know, I've heard it discussed, you know, our spiritual past, and sometimes I wonder, really, you know, we have this intention of developing ourselves spiritually, as we say. Usually when we hear that, we think of following some kind of an ideal or some kind of a set of rules that somebody has made up for what it is to be spiritual. And something I'd like to point out is that those rules, those concepts of what it is to be spiritual, is not necessarily consistent with the cosmic plan for the evolution of consciousness. So, for instance, you know, something I come to think of, I've read about men in India that have been standing with their arms raised for 20 years. And, you know, it's very impressive. I could not do that. In other words, they never take their arms down. And in India, they're considered as highly spiritual people, saints even, because they're able to do that. Now, another question, though, is, even if, you know, you could call that spiritual, another question is that really something that serves the cosmic plan? In my own opinion, it really isn't. You know, yes, you know, I gave it the person who does that kind of thing the credit of being able to stand with the arms raised for 30 years or 20 years or whatever it is. Many, many things like that, you know, are considered highly spiritual. But then again, is this really consistent with the cosmic plan? And when it comes to the cosmic plan, it's really based on the evolution of consciousness. But then, you know, just the fact that we're using the word evolution of consciousness means that even if, you know, there is such a thing as consciousness that has always been expressed and is now being expressed through us, that consciousness has not been the same, because consciousness has evolved. And there is a very specific plan, a series of steps, evolutionary quantum leaps that really accounts for the evolution of consciousness. And so true spirituality, and maybe we shouldn't even use that word, but true adherence to the cosmic plan is about climbing these steps, because these are steps that have been preset, you might say, preordained or predetermined according to a cosmic plan of us. And to the best of my knowledge, the best way of going about that is really to study the Mayan calendar. And the Mayan calendar is different from other calendars. It's different from other concepts of time, other concepts of evolution. It's not about just a cyclical processes constantly repeating itself. It's not just following a straight line where you are narrowly going more and more in the direction of a specific spiritual evolution. It's actually a series of quantum steps where each of these quantum steps endows you, to the extent that you embody it, endows you with a particular kind of creativity, but also perception of the divine reality. In other words, the perception that humanity has had on these different quantum steps of the divine, of the source of spirituality, has not been the same. And so I'm coming back to this a little bit silly example of the Indian guy who's raising his hand for 30 years. I would suggest that that's something that came out of a tradition, a Vedic tradition that was basically seeded 2,500 years ago. And it actually belongs to a level of a relationship to the divine that is not at the top of the pyramid. It's not at the 9th level. Rather, it is at the 6th level. It's about presenting something that makes you feel that in the eyes of the divine, you're being spiritual. Now, this has the fact that these different steps in the evolution of consciousness, that they have different frames of consciousness, is consequential. And so what might have seemed 2,500 years ago in the Vedic culture as being highly spiritual may not at all be what we should be called to, or what we should listen to today. And just basically, as most people will know, most of the 5,000 years of the long count of the Maya, the 5,000 years of the 6th wave, which is identical to the Kali Yuga, most of that time has been a time of very much dominance, cruelty, and very, very separating relationships between human beings. And for that reason, I would question everything, every kind of an ideal that goes back to that particular frame of consciousness as a guiding tool for us to look into the future and what we are supposed to become. Now, it's a complex mixture of our consciousness, I should say, is made up of a you might say, a hybrid form of different levels. These different 9 levels will form in each one of us a particular interference pattern, a particular hybrid form of consciousness. But then today, I would say we are called, or should be called, to go beyond the earth, everything that's been told in the past 5,000 years, essentially. And rather than looking upon this as an individual path of spirituality, where we can sort of tell ourselves and tell the world that we are spiritual people, we should go beyond that and go into a state of consciousness which is about a shared unity. It's not a state of consciousness that emanates from ourselves. It's something that's given to us. The ninth wave is something that's given to us. And that's a shared view. It's not just my consciousness or your consciousness. It's something that's shared consciousness, because ultimately the consciousness is one. But we can't ignore, if we are going to return to that state, we can't ignore that it's been a stepwise, quantum stepwise evolution of states of consciousness that are not necessarily shared, that are not necessarily unified as it used to be. And so that's really my message for today. It's to leave behind any kind of ideals, whether it's from religions or spiritual traditions that go back to a very early time as to
shared consciousness. Thank you so much, Carl. You know, when we talk about the ninth wave and we talk about evolution, we talk about the cosmic plan. And as Alan was saying about us all being one and shared consciousness, and we're now into the 40th speakers now, and it's the thread that's going through everything is about us being one, about us actually following our divine path, our guidance, following our love, following our inspiration, and really kind of looking at the energies that we have around us to actually guide us with that growth, with that journey, with that seeking, whatever word we use for it. So thank you so much.